everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Contour Cutting Made Easy with Dr. Flexi Mark Rugen. We thank everybody for joining this morning. If you have any questions during the session, please type them into your chat window there, and during the session we will stop and ask questions that you've presented to Mark. And with that, I'll turn it over now to Mark.
We're going to talk about contour cutting and why it's so easy in Flexi, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the features. You know, I've been doing this for about 30 years now, and you know, we didn't have printers back when I started, and then when printers got released, you know, Flexi was way ahead at that time. And then folks were trying to use, you know, they're struggling these days. I can see, I've talked to folks that are using like Illustrator or Corel or something like that, and they've got to go through a lot of hoops to get that contour cut just right. And what the Flexi folks have done is they've really fine-tuned this, because Flexi is not just a design software, it's also production. It runs machines. So with that in mind, that's how the programmers work. They look at how to design and then how to output it and some of those bottlenecks in between. So we're gonna talk about that. Another good thing about Flexi, why you want to use Flexi, is because so many different combinations of printers and cutters. If you're using Mimaki or Roland, you've got a printer-cutter combination, fine. If you're using, you know, a Muto or a Mimaki and you'd rather use a Graphtec cutter, fine. You can combine all those things together, so that's also what makes a really good program. And finally, and I think most importantly, is just the workflow. You know, print and cut, contour cut and print and perf cut is not the easiest thing to do in the world. I mean, it's a production type of thing where you're contour cutting and then you're also maybe perf cutting through the vinyl, and there's a lot of settings on blade depths and pressures and so forth that can slow things down. So you want to make it as easy as possible and as flawless as possible, and that's what I think you're going to see today as well. Hey, David Bowley, nice to see you. We're also going to talk about when you're adding contour cuts to objects in Flexi. You know, one of the best things is you're going to be working with vectors, you're going to be working with bitmaps, maybe some combination of that. You want to be able to work with those bitmaps in particular quite easily. And you want to be able to work with vectors so that you can do things like turning on the inside of the holes, in other words, like on the inside of O's and so forth, or turn them off if you don't want it. You want to make that kind of procedure easy. So Flexi makes that happen. Also, I want to talk about how Flexi supports these printer and cut combinations. There's literally, I'm very impressed with what has happened over the years. It's almost like somebody that just collects receipts and sticks them in a drawer, you know, and you just keep adding and adding and adding. It's amazing how many cutters and how many printers Flexi will run. So what's good about that for you folks is not only does it give you a print-cut combination today, but in the future, if there's other printers, other cutters, other procedures that happen, you know, Flexi's going to be there for you. And if you want a full list of that, just go to the thinksai.com website, and there's when you click on the Flexi program, there's a web page there that lists like all of the drivers and all of the printers and so forth. It's pretty impressive. So finally, let's talk about this workflow for a second. So what happens is we get an image that's a bitmap or vector artwork or both. We want to be able to create the contour cut on it and then output that job easily. And then we also want to be able to make changes easily. So I'm going to show you some of that. And finally, one of the things in contour cutting that we have to really pay attention to is how do we handle long runs where, and by long what I mean is, you know, let's say 10 foot plus, you're cutting that much vinyl. Clearly that vinyl is moving in your vinyl, and it could be walking or skewing a little bit. How do we handle those situations? So we're going to go over that also in just a second. So let's talk about that, okay? All right, so let's get started here. Let's talk about contour cut, right, and how easy this is to do. Now I'm going to do something here. I'm just going to type in some letters, okay? So I'm just going to type in some very easy letters here. Now, one of the things I want to stress that makes Flexi different than, say, Illustrator and some of these other programs, okay? When you select something, this is vector artwork. When you select vector artwork and you go to contour cut, it's contour cut standing in the effects menu, and you just choose contour cut. is you'll see here, it immediately placed the shape of the contour here. And I want you to notice a few things. If I make that larger, or as I make it smaller, you can see I can go negative, I can go positive. When I go a little bit larger here and they start to overlap those contour cut lines, look what's happening automatically. See, they automatically weld together. This is an important distinction, a very important distinction in workflow compared to other programs. Because what can happen in other programs is, number one, you don't have a contour function in those programs, and what happens is when the lines overlap, it thinks you're adding a stroke or a path or something like that, and you intend it to overlap, and you don't. You don't want it to overlap. You want it to weld together. So you have to take a couple of extra steps to get things to happen. And also in Flexi, take a look at this. In the Design Central over here, when you click on With Holes, it automatically puts the holes in the contour, or you can uncheck it and it automatically takes them off. So again, instead of going one by one and having to delete these interior cuts, it's all done automatically. So that's kind of what we mean by workflow. And then finally, in the Flexi product, it automatically assigns the correct name to the path that's a contour cut. And by that, what I mean is when you assign a name to it, it has to be named. The standard convention in contour cutting is called cut contour, I believe is the name, and it's a spot color. Well, that's automatically done in Flexi. So if you send this out to VersaWorks, or if you send it to Onyx or some other program, if that's what your choice of rips are, it will understand that that's a contour cut. Again, in other programs, you must create a color and you have to name it appropriately. And I've seen so many times folks that are new to contour cutting will sometimes think they've named it correctly and they haven't, and it just creates all kinds of issues. So this is what we're talking about here, right? In addition, a couple other options, by the way. If I go to where it says Contour in Design Central and I click the down arrow, I can just do a rectangle immediately. So you can actually create a bumper sticker or whatever, or if you're making labels and you just want to cut around them and that kind of stuff, that's done. That's already included. Or you can go in here and just choose ellipse. You want to do something that's more of a circular sticker. Maybe that's going to go on a hat, or you're just making a sticker for a football game or something like that. That's all included, which is kind of cool. And then finally, I'm just going to take my digitizer pen over here. In fact, I'll just take my pencil, and I'm just going to draw some kind of strange shape here. And I know you know that's strange, so I've got that strange shape right there. What also is nice about Flexi is any vector artwork, anything, stars, rectangles, or this strange shape as you see here, when you go to the effects menu, or excuse me, the arrange menu, you can actually say, I want to make that into a contour cut. So even that works. So you don't have to have something that's just the shape. You can design it. So if you start thinking about this, sometimes when you have a graphic and you're trying to put a contour cut, say, around an object that has a real complex background, you just want a contour cut around a certain part of an image, you could manually draw it in if you want to. So that's a good capability as well. So that's kind of the overview of contour cutting. Now the other thing that's nice, let's close that file up, and we're going to open up a little bit different file here, and I'm going to change my preferences real quick. This is nice too, by the way. I'm going to tell Flexi, whenever you look for a file, instead of looking in that folder, I'm just going to tell Flexi, go to my desktop over here, and I've got a folder there that I've got my samples in, or maybe this is where you keep all your jobs. You can just tell it where you want to go here. Click OK and OK, and guess what? Now when I hit open, it goes to the folder I want it to go to all the time, which is kind of a shortcut. So even that saves you a little time. But let's open up an interesting file here. Let's go to this guy right here. It's a little early for this, but we'll open it up anyway. I always tell that joke. It's a funny one. All right, so we're going to take this little bottle here, and we've got, want to put the contour cut around that. So again, let's turn the bottle on its side, okay? And let's type a little lettering in here. We'll type in Miller, and we'll just resize that. So I have actually got a vector artwork as well as bitmap artwork. So I'm going to take the word Miller and change the color of that real quick, and let's move that. I'm going to right-click on it and just move it behind the bottle. So I'm going to move it to the back, in other words. And you run into that problem on some of these bitmaps where the white part of the bitmap is interfering with the letter. So you have to make that white part of the bitmap transparent. And of course, you don't have to go to Photoshop to do this. There are many times in Flexi, especially in this kind of situation, where you can get that transparency very easily. In the bitmap menu up here, there's actually a capability called Make Transparent, all right? And you can use this magic wand, or you can select it using any of the bitmap selector tools. Makes no difference. But whatever you select, whether it's the white part or even part of the bottle, once that's selected, using Make Transparent, when you apply that, it immediately makes that part that you've selected transparent. Now that's really nice because I didn't have to go out now and transfer the file back and forth. I'm going to select both of these graphics because now when I add my contour cut to it, you'll see it's actually, we'll change that back to contour, it's actually the shape of the bottle, the shape of the letters, the shape of the bottle, and again I can resize that, plus or minus whatever I need to do to accomplish my graphic. Here's the real magic. I'm going to back that drawing just a hair because here's the real magic of this. There's a couple of things that customers will do. What they'll do is they'll say, well, can I see another font size, style for the word Miller, and can you move it in a different location? Again, this is workflow, right? So I don't have to redo all the contour over and over again, undelete and change it and remove it and all that. So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to choose Select Within, and I'm just going to click on the text menu right here where it says Text. And Flexi will actually let me then scroll through if I want to, or just simply check another font style, and it immediately updates all of my contour cuts right along with it. So whenever I choose a new font style, right, it's going to update the contour cut. And if the customer wants to move it, you can move the word wherever you want to locate it. And if you move it, it's updating the contour cut. If you rotate the beer bottle a little bit, there's a lot of things you can do to make changes. Again, this is part of workflow. Okay, very, very important capability. In addition, this is called a kiss cut. Some people call it that, or perf cut. You can also go back and add a second contour cut to this. And that second contour cut, you can actually say, what I would like to do is instead of making that a contour cut, okay, I'm going to choose perf cut. So a perf cut is something like a pattern. I'm going to make a pattern here. This is a little bit of too much of a gap, but I want to explain what a perf cut is for everybody to understand as well. All right, so let's magnify that. So the first, what's going to happen is I'm going to ask Flexi, print the bottle and print the lettering. Then, add registration marks. You'll see that in a second. Then I want you to laminate it, let's say, make a dozen copies or whatever. And I'm going to ask it to contour cut the first solid line, which is just going to cut the vinyl. That's going to be the sticker that I'm going to put on something, a truck or a gas station sign or whatever. The second one, that's the dotted half there, the dashed half, that's actually called a perf cut, and that's going to go all the way through the vinyl. Now, there are lots of different patterns. You can create your own. For some older cutters that don't have patterns built in, you have to make your own pattern, and you'll have to test the blade depths and all that kind of stuff. Some of the more recent cutters, I know Muto has this as an example in the cutter. There's actually a predefined contour cut pattern that they feel is very good for doing perf cuts. So those are some things that the Flexi folks pay attention to try to make sure that they stay up to date, so all those features get added into the software there. So let's say we want to do this job here. The second thing to do is to go to your printer. We're going to go to the wide format printer icon at the top. And let me shrink this down so you can see it a little bit better. Let's see here. And I apologize for this. Let me just shrink this over here a little bit. It's actually too big. My computer here is giving me issues with visuals, so I'm going to have to move this for you. I hope you can see that a little bit better. Basically, what you're seeing is over here in the upper left-hand corner, bottom corner, and so forth, and I apologize for the size of this. I can't make it any smaller right now, is you're seeing registration marks. And those registration marks were added automatically. They're based on the fifth tab over here, which is a contour tab, and it's based on the cutter that you've chosen. So these would be the appropriate registration marks automatically added for a graph tag. If I were using U.S. cutters, maybe it's a different style of contour registration mark. Or if I'm using, say, a Roland, it puts the circular markers in like Roland likes. These are all automated. So that's what's nice about this, is you're pretty much automating everything with the registration marks. Secondly, you have options for those registration marks. So, for instance, in my options button here, when I click on that, it brings up a little menu that allows me to do a couple of things. So sometimes, in the mechanics of doing contour cutting, each of these cutters may have a little light source that detects the registration marks. And it's possible that those registration marks might be a little thin because you've laminated them, and maybe they're not being picked up as readily by your optics in your cutter. You can use Flexi to create longer marks or shorter marks. You can increase the thickness of the mark. You can change the margins if you want to, put them closer to the graphic, if you will. You can make these changes smaller, larger, thicker to accommodate the actual workflow of the production. So again, this is what makes Flexi different than the other softwares, is that they may be able to add contour cuts and registration marks, but there's these small accommodations that make a big difference, and that's really what we're talking about here. In addition, at the bottom, on the left-hand side here, you'll see it says Drawing Colors Driver Options, and it's separated the cut contour from the perf cut over here on the left-hand side, okay? The reason is because, well, clearly I can probably cut my contour cut rather fast with the normal vinyl pressure, because we're really basically just cutting vinyl. But for the perf cut, I don't want to cut fast. I want to cut slower because I'm going all the way through the media. And I may also want to slow down quite a bit because I don't want to, jerk that media back and forth in my cutter. So I could separate those into two different kinds of pressures. I can literally from Flexi say, for my perf cut here, when I double click on that name, I'm going to say, tell you what, for this particular cutter, instead of going fast, why don't we use what's called, in their case, I don't know, you can choose anything, cut slow. You can tell it how much pressure to apply. This is for the graph tech. It looks different for other cutters. But you can literally control the speed, the acceleration, the pressure from Flexi. So that accommodates what has to happen in your particular production shop. Because everybody has a little bit different cutter, a little bit different blade depth, and so forth. So you can tweak the blade, the pressure and so forth to accommodate a new blade or perhaps a little older blade and so forth. You can tweak the speed because maybe your particular cutter has a little more skewing than most. I mean, those are the kind of things that are built into this. That's what makes it a very nice capability. But getting to this point, that's the real key, getting to the point of being able to do this quickly. Now, there's another feature here I want to talk about. I'm going to close this file up, and I'm going to open up a different file. And I think you'll see the reason for this. Let's see, what's the name of that file? Don't know if I have it in here. I may have to go to a different location. Let me do that. Let me scroll over to a different location here. Just give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, I know it's in here. All right, let's go to a little bit different kind of situation. We'll pick this one out. Let's start with this one. Let's talk about it. So here we go. We got a couple of these wonderful contour cuts made here. We could make copies of these. A very interesting capability in Flexi is to take those graphics, go to the Arrange menu, and choose True Shape Nesting. Now what that does is that's going to allow you to make copies of this graphic. I'll make 6 of them, let's say. And I'll put a little space between and allow them to rotate and so forth. Basically, you can redraw and test this before you actually apply it. You can even use holes. So if you had something like a very large letter with an O in it and you wanted to cut a smaller decal in the inside of the O, I mean, you could really save a lot of vinyl like that. But let's click OK on that. I'm going to apply it. And what did it do? It actually created multiple copies of that graphic, but arranged them to use the least amount of vinyl. And you can actually adjust the width of the media that you're printing on and the length and so forth. So you can really tweak this to your graphic. That's another feature of contour cutting that folks kind of pass up, because you want to arrange these with the least amount of material waste, and that's part of the Flexi solution as well. So we're really talking about a software here that lets you make contour cuts easily, add perf cuts easily, do multiple copies. It takes care of the registration marks. All those things happen almost automatically. There's a little bit of thinking that has to go into it, but what the Flexi folks have done is they've sort of taken out the complications of contour cutting, and that's why we called the webinar Contour Cutting Made Easy. There is nothing. I have looked at all kinds of software out there. There is nothing as simple as using Flexi for contour cutting. So that is contour cutting made easy, I believe. There's a lot more we can talk about if we had 2 hours to talk about it. I want to invite everyone to these webinars, as well as the shows we have when we go to the MBM shows. I know there's folks at SAI that do hour-long, hour-and-a-half-long seminars, and we try to travel all over the U.S. to do seminars as well. So keep in touch. Keep in touch. Terry asked, will that feature be fully explained on the YouTube video? Absolutely, yes. That is Contour Cut Made Easy there. You folks can send me some questions if you'd like. We're done with that part of the webinar. Let's see. I have one here from Brian. What setting do you set for contour cut to not get the white edges? 0 still leaves a little white on the edge. I think that you're probably discussing bitmaps. That's my guess. So in the event of, say, the Miller bottle that we were using a little earlier, right? Remember the bottle, all right? So when you set a contour cut, right, and you make the transparency of the background go away here. So we'll choose that. I'm going to zoom in on this as close as I can get. Really close there. Let's see here. I don't want to do that. I want to do that. And then I want to zoom. There we go. Really tight. So when you're doing a contour cut and you're using that make transparency capability and selecting it, you can probably see it's just a hair away from the graphic. So when you select OK on that, it deletes the background, and then when you go in and add your contour cut, there's a possibility, even when you go down to 0, that you may see a little bit of that white on the background there. So what you want to do is you might set that at just a slight negative amount. It doesn't have to be very much. In this case, it would cut right on the inside of the bitmap there at a negative amount of like 0.03, so 0.03 of an inch within. You would probably very little, size change, but you would eliminate some of that white background back there. That's one way you can do this. Hopefully that answers your question.
Eric has another question about using a production manager and contour cuts. He said he's having trouble getting production manager to recognize crops and cuts. They're showing up in the wrong place.
Crops and cuts in the wrong place. I'm not sure I understand that question. Most of the time in Flexi, when you put a contour cut on there, it should automatically assign the contour cuts registration marks. So if we take what we have here and we go to print that, And let me move this over. The style of the contour cut marks and so forth is determined with that last tab in the rip and print menu. And this is where, where it says registration mark, there's actually a number of different kinds of registration marks for each kind of cutter. So you might want to check in here. That could be possibly some information that maybe this is set to none, or it could be set to some style that's not that you're not seeing, or something like that. That's the only thing I can think of, because typically it will find them and assign those automatically.
He's clarified here, the cuts in the graphic are in the wrong place, often right time through the middle of the graphic.
So sometimes what happens there is, and we got to be really careful about this, is in some cutters, after you print this, we got to make sure you put it in correctly. So it has to be, like we wouldn't put this in upside down in this example and start on the back side, because that would confuse the cut marks. Secondly, there's a possibility that you have to really check that contour cut mark, because typically what happens is the reason for the registration mark is to actually register the contour cut. So typically you're not going to get that kind of result. It's not going to cut through the middle of something. Very unlikely that would happen. So I'm not saying it's not happening, but there's something in terms of the registration marks. Got to make sure that machine finds those marks properly. That's probably what it is.
Yeah. And Eric, if you're continuing to have that type of problem, I would invite you to contact our tech support department, and they can help you more specifically with your cutter and your specific setups. Let's see, we had another question here about contour cutting with Photoshop files. I guess, can you bring the Photoshop files in directly to cut?
You cannot, because the Photoshop files are all raster images or bitmaps. So you would need a program like Illustrator or Corel that would add the contour cut line. But you can bring those images into Flexi and then add the contour cut line. So if you take them straight into Production Manager, there's not going to be any recognition of contour cut lines or registration marks.
Let's see. Okay. Any other questions that we missed? If so, please retype them. Marie asks, why are there two locations for the CC in the menu, Arrange and Effects?
Right.
They seem to be different.
Sure, that's a decent enough question. Let's just draw a graphic here. So the one that's used most often is in the Effects menu, where you have contour cut. So that's where you're adding things like the standard contour cut, making it positive, negative, whatever values you want to add to it. That's where normally you're seeing that kind of thing, right? So let me make this positive, and we're just making a contour cut on there. There is one in the Arrange menu called Contour Cut, but that's actually where you can make a contour cut when it's a custom drawn image. So if I want to add another contour cut around here, and I'm actually drawing a graphic, or if I have a star that I actually want to make, as long as it's a closed contour like this, the Arrange menu actually says create that, make that into a contour cut. So it'd be nice if they were all in the same menu, but that's the way they arranged it. So unfortunately, that's make contour cut is a part of the Arrange menu rather than the Effects menu.
Okay. And Marie is also asking if you can do a class on Flexi filters and Adobe plugins at some point, Mark.
I think that would be an excellent topic. Yes, I think that'd be an excellent topic. You can go on the YouTube page. There are a couple of YouTube videos on that. I don't know if we've done a webinar on it, but I know we certainly had a couple of YouTube videos that were really good.
Okay. Yes, if anyone has a suggestion for a webinar that you'd like to see, we'd love to hear those ideas.
Good
How do you
question from David.
Yep. How do you contour cut several stickers so that the cutting is in sequence instead of jumping around all over?
Yeah, this is a great question. In Flexi 12, we just added a great feature. What happens is, I'm going to show you this real quickly here. So I'm just going to draw these. Now, the way I drew these was the first star was on the bottom, and then the second one was 2 were in the middle, and then there's 1 on the top there. So that's the order in which I drew those stars. So typically what happens is when you send this to your cutter, it should cut in that order. That's how it wants to cut. But what if we had these kind of mixed up? What if they were all arranged differently? One's here at the top. It's kind of like the cups, where you're trying to find the P. That's like, it's all over the place. Well, there's a great feature in the Arrange menu, and this applies to contour cutting too. In the Arrange menu, there's a capability called Cut Order, and if you choose Reorder, it actually shows you the order in which these contours or these contour cut lines are going to actually cut. So if you look in here, it actually shows that my cutter blade would go up to the top and then down here to the bottom, and then it's sort of random, but it's in the order that I've placed things. So when you're doing multiple copies of something, it's possible they get out of order. So with Flexi, where it says cut order, you can literally use Design Central now to say to Flexi, I want to sort these contour cuts if they were contour cuts. I want to do them as fast as possible with the least amount of movement. So in this case, it's rearranging them. 1 is now on the bottom, and then it goes to the top up here, and then over to 3, and then on the bottom, much more. So you can manually arrange them, or you can actually use Flexi to arrange those in such a way as to create the best cut path for yourself. And that is important for contour cutting. Once you apply that, you can also verify it using that same menu in the Arrange menu called Preview. So then it actually shows you a preview of how the contours are actually going to cut. So that kind of gives you a little verification. That's an important feature to use in contour cutting as well. Thank you for asking that.
Let's see. We have a couple suggestions that came through on other webinars, and those are really good ideas. We have Flexi with any printer and Summa Cutter with the barcode feature as a suggestion, and also using Flexi Color Profiler. Both good suggestions. Another question was the difference between two-shape nesting and page nesting.
Right. So what true shape nesting is about, let's just apply this here. What true shape nesting is about is it uses the actual shape of the graphic. So if there's room, I'll just sort of simulate this. If there's room to place pieces inside of a graphic there, then, or next to it, it actually uses the shape. Now, if you think of this star as having a rectangle around, you can actually see the dots around the edge as like a rectangle. What page nesting does is it only arranges it according to the rectangle. So it wouldn't actually move up close to the star on the top. It would respect the X and Y size of the graphic, and it would typically arrange things so that they're maybe like this, where they're orderly, but not using the actual shape itself. That's the difference between those two nesting routines.
Another question, do contour cut lines have to be converted to outlines and compounded?
Contour cut lines do not have to be converted to anything. Once you have a graphic selected and you choose contour cut, the lines that you see there are automatically converted into contour cut lines to signify to the machine to not print them but to actually cut them. Now, if you import something, say, and this might be what the person's talking about, if you import, say, something from Illustrator, you may have to actually assign those, and you may have to convert those. Because a lot of times folks will use like a stroke or something like that for their to define their contour cut line in Illustrator, and those do have to be converted typically. So that would be the only circumstance I would see that, but in Flexi you do not have to do that.
Kimberly's having trouble with large graphics going offline.
Not sure the exact question there. It might be one for tech support. I don't know if she's saying that there's large graphics will crash the Production Manager or Flexi. That's certainly possible not only in Flexi but every graphics program. So there is a limit in Windows in the size of the graphic, but I'm not sure of the answer to that question. I would say touch base with tech support.
Okay. It looks like she might be clarifying that question, but in the meantime, Jeff has asked, can you apply contour cut lines to multiple objects without them automatically being grouped?
Yes. So you saw, like in this case, I did multiple objects and I applied the contour cut. And what he's asking is that when I had those things, when I selected all of them and did the contour cut, it actually grouped them together like that, right? So and the reason is because Flexi is assigning one contour cut, let's put it that way. Even though there's 4 on the screen here, it's actually assigning one effect to the 4 objects considered contour cuts, right? So what you could do is you could right-click in here and separate the contour cut, and then each of those will be individuals. Now you'll have to, literally make sure those are, that you select the contour cut line and the actual graphic. But you can separate the contour cut line, and you can separate it again and then group it. That's about the only way, because the way Flexi works is it's considering, when you group a set of graphics, it doesn't consider them as a set of graphics. It considers them as one piece, and that's why it groups them together automatically. That's something I think that we can look at is to make a change to.
Okay. Kimberly clarified she's having issues with the material sliding on the GraphTech when contour cutting. Any suggestions for dealing with that?
Right. That's a very good question. And what happens there, Kimberly, is all of these cutters, most of the cutters, let's just say these days, actually work with the pressure of the actual pinch roller to hold down the actual piece. So a couple of things to look at. One is you always want to do a little maintenance. Look at the actual pinch roller itself, and then look at the little grit bar that's underneath it, and make sure those are clear of any kind of extra vinyl. Sometimes what happens is vinyl gets caught in the pinch roller, and that can cause sliding. The second thing that can happen, and this is more rare but can happen over time, is one pinch roller can actually place more pressure than the second one or the third one. So what happens there is, if there's more pressure on a pinch roller on the right side than the left side, for example, it starts skewing the vinyl at some point. So you'll have a pretty hard time with that. So it is a good idea to check your, if you're going to do a lot of this, make sure all of those things are correct. You might want to check with your reseller that sold you the GraphTech, and maybe they can help you with going through how to test that to see if it's working correctly.
Don had a question about Make Transparent feature. It isn't highlighting when he tries to combine images. Any idea how to fix that?
When he tries to combine images. I'm not sure what that question is, but let's take a look here real quick. So let's take, take these ink bottles here. I'm not sure if that, so that's a bitmap as well. So again, if I don't do the Make Transparent, it's just a rectangle. I want to do transparent in this area, okay? So if I take this graphic and I go to my bitmap and I choose Make Transparent, no problem. It selects that background, and I can say OK to that. Now what he may be asking is, if I take this, I've undone everything. Let's make sure that's the case. Yes. Now if I add another graphic in here, all right, so now I have 2 graphics. Okay, and I've selected both of those, and then he may be asking that if I go to my bitmap here and choose Make Transparent, it's no longer available to me. And that is because you have 2, it has to be applied to one graphic at a time. Now, if you've combined these together, and let's say that you've grouped them or done something like that. Let's say you've grouped them together so that they act as one piece, right? You can always try this. Right-click and select within and pick the graphic. I'm going to pick the arrow, right? And that kind of even though they're combined together, it's only looking at that one object, and that should allow me now to use my Make Transparent so that they become available, and that means then when I apply it, I should be able to apply that graphic. So even though they're still grouped together, combined so to speak, you can only apply that transparency to one bitmap at a time.
Okay. David's asking, can I manually edit the contour points?
Very, very good question. So let's go in here and let's do just what we just did. We're going to select within. I'm going to choose this one, and we're going to do Make Transparent on that. Okay. And then we'll take both of these and we'll add our contour cut line on it like that. Okay. Let me turn off that artboard so we don't have to see it. There we go. So here we have a case where maybe what I'd like to do is edit some of this graphic. Maybe I want a straight line to go from the bottle all the way across the top here instead of dipping down around the handle of the arrow or something like that. Or maybe I want to clean up above the paint bucket or whatever. So a contour cut line, like an outline, you're not able to edit it very much because it's considered part of an effect. However, when you right-click on a graphic that has a contour cut line and you separate the contour cut line, you don't see much of an effect on the screen here, but what you've actually done is you've separated the contour cut line from the actual image itself, and that makes it fully editable. So now at this point, if I wanted, say, to draw a line from here to here, I could draw that in using my editing tools, and when I apply that, I can actually edit my contour cut line. So if you separate the contour cut line, that's the actual answer to that question. If I pick a couple of points and I've separated a contour cut line, once I set my editing, I can actually then edit that at will. So it's just like drawing it in almost.
Nice. Steve has a problem. At the beginning of his cut, the knife stabs the material. Is there any way around that?
At the beginning of the cut, it stabs the material. My guess is probably really hard to say because I don't know the cutter that you're using there, Steve, but it's a lot of times some of these cutters will have what's called an offset setting, and sometimes they tend to begin and end with a little more pressure in order to complete the contour cut. That could be it. Without actually looking at your cutter or knowing what kind you've got, I don't know a specific answer to that, but it sounds a little bit more like a cutter issue rather than a contour issue. The contours, in other words, don't add additional pressure at the beginning or end. It's all whatever the predefined pressures are, so it sounds more mechanical to me. I'd look at the mechanics of it.
Okay. We've got a couple more folks typing here.
Mm-hmm.
Steve has a Vinyl Express Q54.
Yeah, not that familiar with that. Get in touch with the Sign Warehouse guys. They'll definitely have an answer to that. It could be just the blade type or the angle of the blade. I'm not sure. I would contact them. I'm certain that it's a mechanical issue, not a Flexi issue. Positive of that part of it.
Okay. We've got.
You're welcome, Steve.
When contour cutting large graphics, cutting is great at the beginning, but the middle and end cuts gets off. I think that's similar to what you were talking about before, is it, with the pressure points?
I think what it is on long runs, and again, it does have to do with the I don't want to call it quality, but the making sure that the pressure of the wheels is appropriate and so forth. But it also has to do with cutting too fast. So if you slow, number one, Pam, I would say slow the cut down. So don't cut as fast as normal cutting vinyl. That tends to help. if you're doing really long graphics, another thing that's just a tiny tip, if you're doing really long graphics, I'm going to take this, and it may be a bit hard to see in this mini because I can't, oh yeah, no I can, okay. Yeah, let me shrink this down so we can all see it together. Good. There we go. That's probably going to be better. So if you have like a lot of these, you know, there's like a whole bunch of these things. Let's resize that so it'll go on both sides. There we go. So let's say you have a bunch of these, you know, and you're going to cut like 6, 8, 10 feet of graphics like that. Sometimes what you can do is you can go to your paneling here, this second tab, and you can literally say, I want to set these panels up for the graphic, and you can tell it what size panels you want to use. So I know like some have actually said, well, what I'll do is I'll set these to like, you know, 24 inches at a time. You set your panels at like 24 inches, let's say. Okay, that's what I'm doing here. And basically what that does is that when you're sending that file out, it's literally looking at 24 inches at a time. You know, so that way you don't cut the full graphic one right after another all the way to the end. It thinks that you only have 2 feet of final at a time, and it tends to cut 2 feet, and then it will cut the next 2 feet and the next 2 feet. It just sort of tricks it into thinking that you're doing 2 feet at a time. The other thing you can do, depending on the cutter that you have, is you want to take a look at that last tab and select the kind of the type of registration marks you want to use. So for instance, on a GraphTech, they've got something called segmented. And basically what that does is, when I'm going to change the step size here, say to 12 inches. So what that would do is it puts additional registration marks 12, 24, 18 inches apart. So when it's doing the contour cutting, it's actually registering those additional registration marks. That kind of helps you with lining up the contour cut as well. So those are the two methods to use in our classes. We actually go into detail on those, but that's one thing you can try to do there.
Yeah, Pam says the pressure is fine and she has slowed down, but she's still having the problem, and her customer wants a 10-foot piece with no panel.
10-foot piece with no panel. Yeah, and again, when I'm saying no panel, I'm telling it that it is a panel, but it won't actually cut it like that. It's actually going to, like if you said that 10-foot piece was just 2-foot panels, right? It'll stop. It just thinks it's 2 foot, and then it goes right back to the contour cut line and starts again for another 2 feet. What that does is that just prevents the cut from going all the way to the end and all the way back. It tends to cut 2 feet at a time. It's not paneling it, really. You're just faking it out and telling it, I have 2 feet at a time I want you to cut. And then Flexi will actually cut 2 feet, then 2 more feet, then 2 more feet, then 2 more feet. So it won't actually panel it. It's just literally telling the blade, stop at 2 feet, finish that 2 feet part, and then move the vinyl forward, and then start again and attach right where you left off. So it won't even look like it's 2 feet. Yeah, I think she's got it now. Good.
Okay.
Excellent.
And did that answer, Jeff, your question as well about the 24 inches, or would you like that explained again?
Yeah, let me do it in a different way. Perhaps that would help. This might be a little easier thing to do here. Might be easier just to show it in vinyl cutting because that's kind of the easier way to understand this, right? So let's say we're going to do this. So in this case, I have all these stars I want to cut, and it's the same problem. It's over 100 inches long, so it's, nearly 10 feet. Well, if I send this out, it's possible that by the time it gets down to the last star there could be some skewing and so forth. Well, you just take your paneling here, right? And you literally can say, I want to make 2 foot panels. I want to make 2 foot panels here. I think it's this one. I'm not sure. I think that's it. And I'm not saying it on here, but basically what that does is that will cut 2 feet, and then it may cut up to maybe say the edge of the star right here. The the cutter then thinks that it's done, and the new job is sent, and it's the top part of the star. So it starts exactly where it left off and does another 2 feet, and then another 2 feet, and then another 2 feet. So it's just sort of telling the graphic, I want to cut 2 feet at a time. I want to cut 10 inches at a time, or whatever the case may be. It's literally, cutting like this. And when it finishes the first 2 feet, it comes back and starts where it left off and finishes the rest of the star. So it looks like it cut the star in one whole piece, and it did, but Flexi thinks you're cutting 2 inches at a time. That's basically what's happening, or 2 feet at a time, sorry. It takes a little practice. Well, we should do a video on that, and maybe post that.
Yeah, that would be great.
That's the easiest way to do it.
We had another question come in here about contour cutting small letters evenly all the way around, but so that it doesn't look like an offset. Do you have any tips for that, Mark?
Yeah, that is 100% offset, folks. That's where your cutter blade offset. Usually, folks will set that on the actual cutter themselves, and for small cuts, you really need to do that. So on your cutter itself, every cutter has the ability to set the knife blade offset. And what happens there is like in the case of the star, if my offset is incorrect, it can instead of making a point, it could actually cut the point off or make some sort of a little loop or some kind of an anomaly on there, and it just doesn't look like a sharp corner. And that can happen on these small letters. So when you're cutting very small letters, that offset is critical. Because it needs to stop, and then what happens in the vinyl on drag blades is it stops. The blade is told to go another direction, so it has to turn the blade, and that's where your offset is very, very important. If whoever this person is, if you're doing a lot of very, very small letters, you might even consider looking for a cutter that has what's called a tangential blade on it. And what that does is it cuts and then lifts the blade, turns, and then goes back down. So that kind of eliminates a lot of those irregularities like that.
Okay. George is having some issues. He has an Epson printer, 1430, and a GraphTech 6000 printers. When he sets the contour line and registration, the GraphTech will not read the marks. And if that's a question for you, Mark, or if George needs to call into tech support on that.
Well, it's both of us. The GraphTech has two things. One is as I mentioned a little earlier, you might try this, George, when you have your contour cut line on there. When you get to your rip and print menu, those registration marks, you might just go to that last tab in here and make sure, let's pick the right registration marks. You go in the last tab there, and where it says options, there's a thickness and a length that you could change. And what that does is it gives you a little bit more of a target for the GraphTech to find, especially the thickness, by the way. It gives it a little bit more to find. It kind of, we had a lot of users prior to this option. What they do is they just take out a felt tip pen and make the markers thicker. And this sort of does the same thing, but it's done through the actual piece itself. The second thing is there's also a light source that's being used to find those marks, and that light source intensity can be changed or sensitivity can be changed. I would contact the reseller to help you do that. When I had a GraphTech, I had to change that on mine. And as one of the users here, Rebecca, mentioned, is make sure the firmware for your GraphTech is all up to date. Sometimes that affects.
Thank you, everyone, very much for joining. Thank you very much, Mark, for your excellent presentation. We'll do this again next month.
All right. Y'all have a great day today.